diplomacy may help. It can delay and it can take the pressure off in places. But unfortunately, because the Ukrainians are willing to stand and fight, and they're not willing to compromise on their territorial integrity and their sovereignty and their ambition, and Russia can't back off either because that would be politically lethal.
The problem is that Vladimir Putin is he's not healthy person now. He's mentally sick, and all over the world now is sitting on atomic bombs.
بدأت الحرب في أوكرانيا. قوة عسكرية روسية تجتاح الأراضي الأوكرانية، تحرق كل شيء. ناقوس الخطر يدق في أوروبا. بوريس جونسون يريد أن يبدأ الحرب الاقتصادية ضد أصحاب رؤوس الأموال الروس في بريطانيا.
He will never be able to cleanse the blood of Ukraine from his hands. And although the UK and our allies tried every avenue for diplomacy until the final hour, I'm driven to conclude that Putin was always determined to attack his neighbour.
ذهبت إلى لندن لأعرف ماذا بالضبط يريد أن يفعل بوريس جونسون بعد خطابه السياسي، وكم هو حجم رؤوس الأموال الروسية الموجودة في بريطانيا، ولماذا تتجمع الأموال الروسية هنا؟ هل تمول حرب بوتين في أوكرانيا؟ وماذا تعرف السلطات عنها؟ أليشير عثمانوف على علاقة وثيقة بالكرملين. ارتبط اسمه بعقارات في بريطانيا قدرت ب150 مليون جنيه استرليني. رومان أبراموفيتش ارتبط اسمه ب50 عقارا في بريطانيا قدرت بنحو 230 مليون جنيه استرليني. أوليغ ديراباسكا ارتبط اسمه بعقارات قرب قصر باكنغهام تقدر ب70 مليون جنيه استرليني. هي بعض الأسماء لعدد من رجال الأعمال الروس المرتبطين بالكرملين وشبكاته غير المشروعة والخاضعين للعقوبات. ارتبطت أسماؤهم بمبالغ وممتلكات قدرت بمئات الملايين من الجنيه الاسترليني. فلماذا استثمر الروس في المملكة المتحدة؟ ما الذي جعلهم يشعرون بالأمان؟ ماذا سيحدث لكل تلك الأصول الآن بعد أن انحازت المملكة المتحدة بقوة إلى أوكرانيا؟ ما هو مصير استثمارات الروس في المملكة المتحدة؟ وكيف سينجح بوريس جونسون في حربه الاقتصادية ضد روسيا؟ كشف تحليل أجرته هيئة الإذاعة البريطانية أن عشرات الروس الخاضعين للعقوبات مرتبطون بممتلكات تقدر قيمتها بنحو 800 مليون جنيه استرليني في المملكة المتحدة. ومن بين تلك الممتلكات منازل اقتنتها شخصيات مرتبطة مباشرة بفلاديمير بوتين، ومزارع ريفية بملايين الجنيهات في جنوب إنجلترا، وشقق فاخرة في أغلى مناطق لندن. فما كانت أبرز خلاصات التقرير الذي وضعته الإذاعة بالاستناد إلى فحص تفصيلي للوثائق الخارجية المسربة والسجل العقاري وأوراق المحكمة، بالإضافة إلى التقارير السابقة؟ بعد إعلان رئيس الوزراء البريطاني عن فرض عقوبات جديدة على روسيا، حثت منظمة الشفافية الدولية في المملكة المتحدة الحكومة على تسريع الإجراءات للقضاء على الأموال القذرة. وكان تحليل جديد من منظمة الشفافية الدولية في المملكة المتحدة قد حدد ما لا يقل عن 1.5 مليار الجنيه استرليني من الممتلكات البريطانية المملوكة لروس متهمين بجرائم مالية أو على صلة بالكرملين. معظم هذه الممتلكات مملوكة لشركات خارجية سرية، ومن المرجح أن يكون الرقم الحقيقي للثروة غير المشروعة المستثمرة في المملكة المتحدة أعلى بكثير، مع ما يقارب من 90,000 عقار في جميع أنحاء البلاد مملوكة لشركات غير شفافة، مما يمنع الحكومة البريطانية والقانون والجمهور من معرفة من يمتلكها حقاً. أمام ذلك تبدو الجولة على الأسماء التي تناولها تقرير BBC حول أولئك الأوليغارشيين الروس والمعلومات المرتبطة بهم مثيرة. تلتزم الحكومة البريطانية الآن بتقديم تشريع من شأنه الكشف عن المالكين الحقيقيين للشركات السرية التي تمتلك ممتلكات في المملكة المتحدة، وأعطاء صلاحيات أكبر لشركة كومبانيز هاوس لمنع إساءة استخدام الشركات البريطانية. كذلك تلفت منظمة الشفافية الدولية إلى أنه يتعين على بريطانيا أن تفعل كل ما في وسعها لضمان أن أقاليم ما وراء البحار البريطانية قادرة على فتح سجلات شركاتها للتدقيق هذا العام، إذ تستخدم الشركات المسجلة في المملكة المتحدة وأقاليم ما وراء البحار التابعة لبريطانيا لإخفاء تدفق الأموال غير المشروعة في جميع أنحاء العالم. وقد حددت المنظمة في المملكة المتحدة 2189 من هذه الكيانات المستخدمة في 48 قضية غسيل أموال وفساد روسية. تضمنت هذه القضايا أكثر من 82 مليار جنيه استرليني من الأموال التي تم تحويلها عن طريق المشتريات المزورة والرشوة والاختلاس والاستحواذ غير القانوني على أصول الدولة. في العاصمة لندن بدأت أولى الاحتجاجات تتصاعد. الناس هنا أيضا يريدون أن يعرفوا المزيد من المعلومات عن المال الروسي ولديهم مطالب واضحة من الحكومة.
I'm here to support Ukraine. My family is currently in Kharkiv. So this is the city that's been bombarded now as we speak, as I stand here. I have family and I have friends all over Ukraine, and I'm here to support them because this is the only thing I can do right now. I cannot be there with them. More weapons now! More weapons now! More weapons now!
Well, sanctions, first of all, they shouldn't be rushed. Otherwise, if they're rushed, they will contain mistakes, and we cannot allow to have mistakes. But so far, cutting off several Russian governmental banks from the SWIFT payment system is a very good one. Also closing airspace, which the European countries did, including Britain, even though it's no longer part of the European Union. It also did that. Even neutral countries like Ireland, it's going to cripple Russia's economy and make sure Putin doesn't have money to wage more wars.
أريد أن أعرف كم هو حجم المال الموجود هنا وأين يتواجد بالضبط. ذهبت إلى ساحة ايتن سكوير التي تعد من أغلى المناطق في بريطانيا. من الطبيعي أن ترى هنا سيارات حديثة وفاخرة أمام المنازل الباهظة الثمن، ومن الطبيعي أن تسمع هنا اللغة الروسية في الشارع.
This is Eaton Square, London SW1. Estate agents tell us this is the most expensive piece of real estate in the whole of England and Wales. Transparency International, the activist group, tells us that the owners behind these anonymous facades are truly anonymous, but their research has revealed that the vast majority of them are Russian or post-Soviet oligarchs. What does that mean for sanctions against Russia? It's easy to freeze a bank account. It's easy to kick out Russia from the international SWIFT banking system. It's very, very difficult to start turning people out of their homes, especially the sort of homes that you see here in Eaton Square, where this one, number 32, was recently advertised for sale. Just an apartment in this building was recently advertised for sale at £9 million. And the average house price here in Eaton Square is almost 17 million. That's the average. So when we're thinking about Russian wealth and assets in the UK, it's not enough to think about financial sanctions. You have to think about ownership, discovering the ownership, and making sure that the Russians are not manipulating the housing market and property prices to the disadvantage of the British people.
غادرت هذا المكان الذي يغص بالأثرياء متجهة إلى شمال لندن، حيث العقارات أرخص بأضعاف المرات، لكي ألتقي بريتشل ديفيس. هذه السيدة عملت لعدة سنوات بالبحث عن مصادر المال الروسي الذي ينتشر في بريطانيا، وهي تطالب من خلال منظمة الشفافية بقانون جديد ضد غسيل الأموال.
So we've been looking into the property sector in the UK since 2016 and collecting information on property that we believe has been bought with suspicious wealth. In total, from all countries, we found £6.7 billion worth of UK property bought with corrupt and criminal wealth. 1.5 billion of that, we believe, is owned by Russian individuals who have either been accused of corruption or have close ties to the Kremlin. So the economic crime bill landed in Parliament this week, and we do think that is a significant step forward. It's very welcome. It contains measures that we've been campaigning for years. There are some gaps in the legislation that we do believe need to be addressed, but on the whole I think this is an incredibly positive development with regards to the bill. So it's incredibly easy to get corrupt and criminal funds into the UK. It's child's play essentially. Now let's look at property as an example. If you want to buy property in the UK anonymously without anybody knowing who you are or where your wealth has come from, all you need to do is open a shell company in a secrecy jurisdiction where you do not have to publicly state who really owns that company, and then you use that company to buy the property in the UK. And when you do that, you only have to tell the land registry the name of the company. You don't have to give them your name at all. So not even law enforcement here in the UK know who owns so many homes in the UK. We estimate about 84,000 homes across Britain are owned anonymously in this way.
أريد أن أسمع ماذا يقول أصحاب رؤوس الأموال الروسية. تواصلت مع عدة رجال أعمال روس من المستثمرين في لندن. أغلب من تواصلت معهم لم يرد على اتصالي، أما الذين أجابوا على الاتصال فقد رفض اللقاء معنا. اتصلت بأحد مالكي العقارات الباهظة الثمن جدا، لديه أيضا عدة شركات ربما وهمية لكنها مسجلة في بريطانيا. هو أيضا رفض الحديث معي. أكملت البحث حتى وصلت إلى الناشط الروسي أندريس سيدلانيكوف. لقد حصل قبل 8 سنوات على اللجوء السياسي في بريطانيا لأنه نظم العديد من المظاهرات السياسية ضد بوتين. التقينا به بالقرب من السفارة الروسية في لندن حيث ينظم نشاطه السياسي.
I'm not thinking about my own risk because I'm doing this for all my life. That's why it's a risk for people because of course Russian embassy filming everyone who is coming to the Russian embassy. But I could say that when I went to different rallies in London, because every day now is a rally for supporting Ukraine, I meet different people from all ex-Soviet Union, from that republics, but Russians, some come, very few people come to these rallies to help and protest. So now they are of course afraid, but the most of them, they are afraid about their money because most of them, they have criminal cases, they have criminal money, and they are afraid about it. They are afraid in how to send money to their relatives in Russia. They must think about it before. Now it's time to stop all of them. They're trying to take their money to send them out of their names.
لكن لماذا يأتي كل هذا المال الروسي إلى بريطانيا؟ وهل يتدخل في صنع السياسة المحلية؟ لكي أعرف ذلك التقيت بالسيد آدم هوك.
I fully welcome the measures that are being taken today. I think they're long overdue. I think I personally have been calling for action on this for a number of years. One of the big failings of the UK's integrated review recently was the lack of focus on tackling economic crime and corruption that centres in London, both as a strategic threat and as an issue that undermines human rights around the world. So we're very glad that this is finally being actioned after years of delay. Particularly relevant is the beneficial ownership register of the London property market, or the UK property market, which is absolutely key to exposing where the assets of oligarchs from around the world have put their money into the UK. So very welcome. Really wish it hadn't taken this to get here. Yes, the invasion of Ukraine obviously has been a massive shock to the international order, and we're finally seeing, after some initial reticence, the Western powers get up to speed in terms of taking decisive economic action, and you've gone from seeing a sort of middle-tier response in the early days of the crisis to actually, some really substantial action that is going to have a real impact not only on Russia's elite but also on the wider economy, with a range of different impacts that we'll see.
أريد أن أسمع رأي السلطات كيف يتعاملون مع الغزو المالي الروسي، وهل لديهم خطة لملاحقة هذه الأموال الملطخة بالدماء؟ كتبنا إلى وزارة المالية عدة مرات لأنها المختصة بملاحقة الأموال القذرة وغسيل الأموال.
We've come to London to find out what effect the British sanctions are having on Russia's war effort following the invasion of Ukraine. Here in the heart of the British establishment, we can see that there's a Ukrainian flag flying on the Treasury building, and the impact is being felt in Russian banks across the capital.
ولأن السلطات رفضت لقاءنا، ذهبت لكي ألتقي بأعضاء من المعارضة. هم يشاركون في صنع القرار ويراقبون عمل السلطة من داخل البرلمان. أريد أن أعرف إذا كان لديهم مطالب واضحة من السلطة ضد المال الروسي الذي يغزو بريطانيا.
Well, I think the first sanctions were too weak, not enough. At the end of last week, on Thursday, the government strengthened the sanctions, but I don't think they're quite there yet. They're not as strong as either the United States or European Union at the moment. It's not clear to me why some banks should be sanctioned and others shouldn't be sanctioned, or why the United States have sanctioned 200 of the Russian billionaires, but not others. So I think we have some catching up to do. Well, I would basically like to see Russia cut off economically as much as it is possible to do that. I think we should really focus on stopping selling them strategic goods, bits for aeroplanes that make aeroplanes fly, and other parts of their economy that they don't make themselves, as well as cutting their ability to enter into the international finance system. So I think we should be as strong as we possibly can be with sanctions. We've been tightening the ratchet, I don't think quickly enough, but we should tighten it a bit more.
Oh, I wish I knew. It's a horrific answer. I think it would be neglectful not to take it seriously. Putin has pasted himself into a corner, but he's done it with holding a nuclear button. And he's got various types at his command, ones that can reach New York, but ones which are of low yield and can have a relatively low or small radius, but are nonetheless, I'm not suggesting they're not horrific. So he has options in this respect if he is going to go there, but he must know that those nuclear options are nuclear in the metaphorical sense as well as the literal sense, because after that, it's impossible to predict what the Western response would be should there be even a low-yield nuclear strike on Ukraine, let alone anywhere else. Again, the West is desperate, understandably desperate, not to get sucked into a war, much less a nuclear one. But at the same time, it's well aware that this is nuclear blackmail. It's not the first time we've heard it from the Russians. The Russians have said in the past that a world without Russia in it is not a world that's useful anymore. TV presenters have talked about, incinerating the US, just years ago. So we're well used to this kind of loose nuclear talk. It's a lot more frightening now that there's the largest land invasion of a European country since 1939 to 1945. So we should take it seriously. But that's not quite the same thing as being totally cowed by it, because obviously the solution to that can't be for us to go and say, oh, okay, you're absolutely right, you've got us where you want us, because obviously that itself would incur further defeat, and the ramifications of that for Europe are also very hard to assess, as hard as, frankly, as a low-yield nuclear strike. So I think the nuclear element is, if not a new element in the game, it's something that is causing Western policymakers, probably some Russian ones as well, to think about how hard their response is, so that Vladimir Putin is not so desperate as to avoid defeat and the shame of defeat by ultimately going crazy. So we're not in Kansas anymore, and we just are struggling to ensure that Vladimir Putin loses this war, but not at this horrific cost. And so each of us are in very difficult positions. And at the moment there seems to be no exit strategy. And just to make life a little bit more bleak, then it's not as if diplomacy can solve this. Diplomacy may help. You know, it can delay and it can take the pressure off in places. But unfortunately, because the Ukrainians are willing to stand and fight, and they're not willing to compromise on their territorial integrity and their sovereignty and their ambition, and Russia can't back off either, because that would be politically lethal. But it seems to me as if I get none of that from my Ukrainian contacts, that they're going to capitulate, surrender, give in, compromise. I think, to be perfectly honest with you, they're willing to stand and die.
The problem is that Vladimir Putin is he's not a healthy person now. He's mentally sick, and all over the world now is sitting on atomic bombs, because this kind of person, like Putin and his rounds, could do everything. They could push the button. We must think, all the world must stop him and his rounds.
ربما وجود هذا الكم الهائل من المال الروسي هنا ليس محض صدفة، وليس فقط كما نعتقد أنه مجرد تبييض أموال، إنما أداة حرب قد تستخدم في أي لحظة. وينستون تشرشل نجح بالفوز بالحرب العالمية الثانية، لكن هل ينجح بوريس جونسون بالحرب الاقتصادية ضد المال الروسي الذي نهش سوق العقارات البريطاني؟
I think there's also a question, for us in the UK, as a society, morally, do we want to be laundering corrupt and criminal wealth from around the world that is disadvantaging people in the countries from where that wealth has been taken?
Hopefully, recent events will see a fundamental change in how cultural institutions and the wider British society at large looks at the sources of all funding, obviously not just Russian, to understand the potential human rights impacts of those sources of funding. And that needs to be improving transparency to make sure people are open about where that money is coming from, and to be very clear that working with authoritarian regimes and the outriders of authoritarian regimes has real world impacts in terms of their impact in the countries they're from, and the UK shouldn't be used to wash their reputations globally. So I think hopefully that is an issue that is now gaining traction.
Well, I think if you go through, I couldn't tell you how each of the 200 or so Russian billionaires who the Americans have put on a list, how each of them are, but you look at the way, for instance, the owner of Chelsea Football Club, his money has been well documented that was stolen from the people in Eastern Europe and helped originally get Yeltsin elected, and then helped get the current president of Russia elected. So those connections are there. I won't be able to tell you all 200 of them, but he's probably the most prominent Russian investor in this country, and it's all there to see. It is filthy money. Well, he's moved, to be precise. He has moved, so he says, control into a charitable foundation. He still owns the money. It looks like a device to stop that money and those resources being confiscated. To me, it doesn't look. It looks like a last-minute way to avoid any sanctions against him. And I'm not sure the Charity Commission will approve of what has happened. It's not clear that comes within the meaning of charity in this country, which is usually about alleviating poverty and educating people.
It leaves them unmoved. It leaves them into a situation whereby they are having to walk back some of their previous moral transgressions, if you like, and they find themselves in an uncomfortable position. The reality is that organisations such as a Russo-British Chamber of Commerce don't really have any meaning anymore. They're just no longer valid. look, you're always going to have this. The corporate sector, broadly speaking, which relies upon a certain income stream from Russia. That's their raison d'etre. It's in their DNA, if you like. They're always going to want to do that. Although, again, we're seeing pullouts by the dozen at the moment, and one just encourages the others. But I think that that will never go away. Russia is always going to be a country of 150 million people, one presumes, unless there's some form of infinite fragmentation after this terrible war. And it's always going to be a market and for essential goods and for luxury goods. And by the way, of course, nobody is talking about taking out essential goods. No, nobody in their right mind would talk about preventing foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals from entering Russia. That would be crazy. Luxury goods, that's a different matter altogether. Entertainment companies now, and tech companies are beginning to think that this is actually, as I say, too toxic, too lethal for them. And they're pulling out, realising that, in fact, that little extra on their margin, because Russia was never, for some of them, Russia was never a huge, depends on the company, of course, but for some of these companies, Russia was never a huge market. It won't make a huge hole in their bottom line. But for others, of course, they are going to suffer a lot more, and this is a big blow to some. It just depends on sector to sector, company to company.
بات من غير الواضح إلى أي مدى قد تكون العقوبات الاقتصادية ضد روسيا مفيدة أو لها أي تأثير. والمال الروسي ليس فقط في سوق العقارات، وإنما متشعب في كل نواحي الحياة الثقافية والرياضية وغيرها في بريطانيا. كيف تؤثر العقوبات على روسيا في سياق الحرب ضد أوكرانيا؟ سألت المعارض الروسي عن اقتراحات المعارضة الروسية.
It's a really good question, and it's always been a good question, by the way, not just now, but because we've been sanctioning Russia for 6, 7, 8 years, then again, nobody in their right mind would want to hurt a single housewife in Voronezh who can't buy a dishwasher which she needs to feed her family of 5 or whatever. I mean, that is never the intention. And sanctions have tried not to hurt those people. You can these days, and I suppose, if I'm honest with you, this is what I've never really understood. The smarter the sanction, the more targeted the sanction on the oligarchic community, on Putin's elite, on his inner and outer circles, that would hurt the average Russian less. So I don't really understand, or at least I've never really understood until now, the idea that you should sort of blanket target Russia and cripple people who want, or obviously ought not to be crippling because they're the same as you and me.
أصبح من الواضح أن المال الروسي في بريطانيا بات يشكل جزءاً مهماً من الاقتصاد البريطاني، ويلعب دوراً مهماً ليس فقط من أجل رؤوس الأموال، إنما أيضاً من أجل المجتمع البريطاني، وهذا يعني أن العقوبات سوف تمس أيضاً الشعب البريطاني.
This is the heart of London's banking sector, with the Bank of England, the old lady of Threadneedle Street, the headquarters of the VTB capital Russian bank. Inside that building, there's business as usual. But of course, business is very much not as usual with Russia as the sanctions begin to bite. The Russian ruble has fallen to record lows against the dollar, and ordinary Russians have been seen queuing outside their banks in Moscow and other great cities to withdraw their cash in a desperate bid to hang on to something of value when the ruble falls through the floor.
ربما نجح المال الروسي بالوصول إلى غايته، لكن هل ينجح بوريس جونسون بإنقاذ بريطانيا منه؟ الآن أغادر لندن، ولدي أمل أن تقوم السلطات بخطوات واضحة ضد الغزو المالي الروسي لبريطانيا.